Hey there, fellow travelers. Tim from Secret Fire Books here. I apologize in advance if my voice sounds a little bit off. I think I'm coming down with a cold. The wintry weather around here is finally starting to catch up to me. But I feel good enough to actually make this video. My voice feels up to it at least. I wanted to do this video before the end of the year to talk about all the books that I read this year. I read 56 books in 2024. I got the list right here. And that's actually pretty good for a slow reader like me. I set myself a goal earlier in the year to read at least 50, and I passed that back in September. And the only reason I haven't read more than 6 since then is just because of family stuff and holidays and what have you. But yeah, I look forward to reading more next year. Hopefully I'll get up to 60 or 70, but we'll see. But yeah, I'm going to rank all 56 of these books. I'll start from the bottom at number 56 and work my way up to number 11, because I actually want to make the top 10 their own separate video, and I'll talk about those at length in a little bit more detail. With these, I'll kind of rapid fire through them. I'll talk a little bit about them, but I'll try to do this in a more expedient fashion. So first, at number 56, the bottom of the list, the worst book that I read in 2024. Can you guess it? Say it with me now. Deathworld 2 by Harry Harrison. That's right. I hated this book. It was awful. I don't want to say that much more about it because I hate thinking about it, and me and my friends at Eebs already did an hour-long video discussing it and picking it apart. Number 55 is Deathworld 3 by Harry Harrison. This book is just a step above Deathworld 2. Is it that bad of a book? Not really. Am I just projecting all of my hatred and spite from Deathworld 2 onto this book because I read it immediately after Deathworld 2? Yes, but you know what? It's not getting any higher up on the list. At number 54, we have Conan the Avenger by Bjorn Nyberg and L. Sprague de Camp. I hated this book. I did a whole review about this book, and it hurt me. It hurt me on a personal level as a fan of fantasy, as a Conan fan. Bjorn Nyberg basically wrote his own crappy Conan fan fiction that had nothing to do with the character. It totally flew in the face of Robert E. Howard's original vision for Conan. And he wrote it in English, a language he didn't even speak, and then he had his friend L. Sprague de Camp edit it for him, and they made some money off of it. And I'm angry that I read it. I'm angry that I have it in my collection. But we got a fun video out of it. And I might have been a little over the top. I might have been a little over dramatic in that video. But I regret nothing. I apologize for nothing. That book deserves what I said about it. Number 53 was The Treasure of the Apache by Tom Hyland. This is an indie western by an indie author. And I feel bad putting another self-pub author this low on the list, but the book was just awful. A pretty bog-standard western plot, but what really brought it down is the horrible writing, the grammatical errors, punctuation errors, stuff like that. Really weird sentence structure that made reading this book more difficult than it should have been. The only reason I finished it was because it's very short. It's just over 100 pages, I believe. Number 52 was The Avenger, Murder on Wheels by Kenneth Robeson. I don't know who actually wrote this. Kenneth Robeson is a house name, so it could have been anybody. Whoever it was did not do a good job. I was expecting, and with a title like Murder on Wheels, I was expecting something really cool, really violent and old school, pulpy. And that's not what I got at all. It was a very tame book, relatively speaking. And you know how when a friend of yours tells you about a dream they had, and you can tell that they are very interested in what they have to say, but you couldn't care less about what they have to say. It's something like that. This was a very boring story that the writer thought was a lot more exciting than it really was. Number 51 is The Man Who Folded Himself by David Gerald. I despise this book. I already don't like time travel, at least as a central part of a narrative. I thought this one had a pretty good setup, though, but unfortunately the main character is just a detestable human being. He has nothing redeeming about him whatsoever, and the book goes into some really gross, perverted, kind of degenerate territory that it had me kind of scrunching up my face in disgust the whole time I was reading this. Number 50 is Caravan of the Damned by Chuck Dixon. I wanted to like this book a lot. I liked Chuck Dixon's first Conan novel, Siege of the Black Citadel, but this novel really disappointed. I wanted to like it. I think in the review I did, I kind of built it up as, oh, it's this fun desert caravan adventure with these bandits, but looking back on it, I really did not enjoy myself. It was weird how Chuck Dixon seemed to forget everything he knew about writing Conan. All of his experience working with Marvel Comics just kind of went out the window with that one. And then number 49 is Deathworld by Harry Harrison, the first Deathworld. Out of the three of us on Eebs who reviewed this book, I probably hate this book more than the rest of them. I did not enjoy it. The beginning was kind of interesting, but it quickly went downhill for me. I felt like very early on, Harry Harrison was getting up on his soapbox and, preaching about environmentalism and gun control and that kind of thing. So yeah, did not enjoy Deathworld at all. All three of the books are awful. At number 48, we have Ninja Master, Vengeance is His. Nick, I'm sorry. I know you picked this one for Eebs, and I know you wanted us to have a good time reading this, but I did not. 10% ninja action and 90% brunches and long, drawn-out conversations about the character's emotions does not a fun novel make. Number 47 was Son of a Wanted Man by Louis L'Amour. I'm beginning to think Louis L'Amour might not be the Western writer for me. I'm trying to get into the Western genre, and Louis L'Amour is a very popular Western writer, but I have not really gelled with any of his books. Son of a Wanted Man is basically Godfather, but set in the Old West, and you can do a lot of cool things with that concept, I think, but Louis L'Amour didn't do anything interesting with this concept, and it ended up being very predictable, and that's something that I really hate when it comes to fiction, predictability. Next was number 46, City of the Beast by Michael Moorcock. I hate putting a Michael Moorcock book this low on this list, but I could tell reading it that this was one of his rapid-fire novels. This was one of the books that he was reading at lightning speed just so he could get a paycheck and help fund New Worlds magazine at the time. And it's a total ripoff of John Carter of Mars, except he didn't really change anything except for some of the names and terminology. I will read the rest of the trilogy just because it is a part of the greater Eternal Champion multiverse, but I'm not looking forward to it all that much. Next is number 45, Star Trek: The Abode of Life. This was just a really boring Star Trek novel. This was by Lee Corey. Star Trek: The Abode of Life by Lee Corey. I have since read other Star Trek stories and seen episodes from the original series that take this kind of concept and do much better things with it. Number 44 was The Sword of the Dawn by Michael Moorcock. This is my least favorite of the history of the Runestaff novels. It's not as badly written as some of the others, but it's just really boring. You might as well rename this book. And then this happened, because that's what's happening constantly in this book. Michael Moorcock is just stringing these really superfluous, oh, there goes my voice. These really superfluous scenes together bit by bit, and they don't really make anything all that satisfying. And then at number 43, we have The Runestaff, the final book in the series. And the only reason it comes ahead of Sword of the Dawn is because even though it is of poorer writing quality, I think Moorcock was really losing steam by the time he got to this one. I do believe that the ending was very satisfying. The ending wraps everything up quite nicely, despite the fact that the rest of the book isn't that great at all. And then number 42 was Conan the Destroyer by Robert Jordan. This is a really mediocre novelization of a mediocre script from a mediocre sword and sorcery movie from the 80s. Written by a good author, by all means, but it's just all not that great. I know that in my movie review of the Conan movies, I gave Destroyer a 5 out of 5 just because it's zany and goofy and has some laughably bad acting. But all of that is played straight in the novelization. So, yeah, it's that low on this list for that reason. Oh, gosh. And then number 41 was, prepare your angry comments, people. Number 41 was Before They're Hanged by Joe Abercrombie, the second book in his First Law trilogy. I gave First Law a fair shot, people. I read the original trilogy from start to finish. I just don't get it. I don't get why people like Joe Abercrombie all that much. He's a good character writer. He writes good action, but his stories are just way too long, way too meandering. And the way he approaches themes in the fantasy section, I did not like at all. I feel like he was just subverting tropes for the sake of subverting them, and I really hate that when it comes to fiction. So yeah, And especially in this second book, I feel like the plot really didn't go anywhere, and the characters really didn't achieve anything by the end of the book. And the worst thing is that I feel like if I told that to Joe Abercrombie himself, he would kind of nod and say, yeah, that was the point of that. Sorry, I just didn't get it. Oh gosh, number 40 was Cthulhu, the Mythos and Kindred Horrors by Robert E. Howard. I cannot stand the fact that I put a Robert E. Howard book this low on the list. It has some good stories. It has Worms of the Earth, Valley of the Worm, Chickens from Hell, which I keep saying is a fantastic story because it is, even though it has a goofy title. But most of the horror stories in this collection were just really boring, very predictable. Like I said, I hate when a story is predictable, especially when it's a horror story. And the fact that I predicted each and every one of the endings for these stories, it really put me in a bad mood, put a bad taste in my mouth. So I love Robert E. Howard. He's still one of my favorite writers of all time, but this book just didn't gel with me. Nick from the Book Graveyard, he mentioned in his own ranking video, he ranked all the books that he read this year, and he also read a horror collection by REH. And he pointed out that even though REH is a great sword and sorcery and action-adventure writer, he might not have been a very good horror writer. And I'm starting to agree with him. Yeah, Cthulhu, Mythos, and Kindred Horrors was not that great, sadly enough. Then number 39 was Bumsider by C.C. McCapp. What else am I supposed to say about this? This was our first Eebs live stream. We talked about it for over an hour. I just feel bad for Bryce from Shelf Centered. We made him be a part of this. We made him buy a copy of Bumsider for like $12. I think the poor guy spent like $12 on that awful book. And when he got it, it was in pieces, and so he had to carry it around in a little plastic bag. I'm sorry, Bryce. I'm sorry we did that to you. And then number 38 is The Changing Land by Roger Zelazny. This book really disappointed me. I love the Dilvish stories by Roger Zelazny. They're a lot of fun, and for this book, I feel like he really just kind of took everything that the Dilvish stories had going for them and just kind of wadded them up in a ball and threw them in the dumpster. Then we have number 37, Conan the Barbarian by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. This is the novelization of the Conan the Barbarian movie. It's okay. If you like the movie, you'll probably get some enjoyment out of the novelization, but it's not all that great. Then, number 36 was The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. This is the third and final book of the First Law trilogy. And it's that much higher on the list above book 2 just because the ending is wild. There's a lot going on in the ending. There's quite a bit to enjoy. But there's still that cynicism and that subversion of tropes that Abercrombie refuses to let up on. That really rubbed me the wrong way. So, yeah. Go ahead, roast me in the comments. I don't like Joe Abercrombie. I don't like First Law. But like I said, I gave it a fair shot. Oh, and as if I didn't drop a bad enough take on that one. Number 35 is Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe. I really, really wanted to like Shadow of the Torturer. It started out being a really cool, kind of dream-like story that incorporated some coming-of-age elements. But after Severian gets that sword and leaves the Citadel, it just goes downhill for me. He's just kind of wandering all over the place. The metaphors go off the deep end. The purple prose goes off the deep end. I just was not enjoying myself, and I can't see myself continuing the series anytime soon. Number 34 was Hondo by Louis L'Amour. Again, I'm not sure I gel with Louis L'Amour. Hondo is okay, but it wasn't anything great. Number 33 was The Mad God's Amulet by Michael Moorcock, the second book in the Runestaff series. This is when I could tell that Moorcock was kind of starting to lose steam. He had a great thing going in book 1, the Jewel in the Skull, had a lot of cool world-building ideas, and he just kind of started to sputter out with book 2, I think. Number 32 is Star Trek Shadow Lord by Lawrence Yep. This was an okay book. It was a little too long for what it was. I think some of the dialogue scenes could have been edited out. The action was fun, and it was my introduction to Star Trek. So, yeah, I think it did its job quite well. Number 31 is Conan the Invincible by Robert Jordan. This was a fun Conan pastiche novel. Robert Jordan did a really good job. Really, the only thing I didn't like about this book was one of the characters, whose name escapes me at the time, was just an absolute shrew of a human being. I could not stand her. I'm glad she got the horrible fate that she got at the end. And then number 30 was the only nonfiction book that I read this year. This was Aie and Black Sabbath, What Evil Lurks by Joe McIver. It was sort of this big a coffee table book, a photo album that kind of gives the visual history of Aie and Black Sabbath's career. And I enjoyed that just because some of my favorite bands, Black Sabbath is one of my favorite rock bands of all time. But it didn't really give me anything I didn't already know. The little vignettes that went off on the little background information it had to give in between all those photos, it wasn't anything I didn't know already, so it wasn't all that interesting. But it was cool seeing all those awesome photos. Coming in at number 29 was Star Trek 6, and number 28 was Star Trek 2, both by James Blish. These are collections of short stories based on episodes from the original Star Trek series, and they're fun. They're nothing amazing, but they're fun, and I think that Star Trek 2 is probably the best Star Trek book I've read so far. Some of the short stories adapted from these episodes are really, really cool. Some of them are even better than the actual episodes, in my opinion. Then number 27 was Hawk the Virgin Stealers by Dan Strebe. This book was ridiculous, really dark and gory and messed up, but it was also a lot of fun. At the end of the day, I am glad that Nick picked this for our Ebes episode. And yeah, it was pretty crazy stuff, but I'm looking forward to reading some other Hawk novels. I'll definitely check out some other books in the series if I get the chance. Number 26 was That Axe Anciently Was Mine by Eric Wagg. This was the first of his Sword and 70s novelettes. Some fun urban fantasy set in the 1970s. If you're a fan of Jim Butcher's Dresden Files, definitely check out Sword and 70s because they're some real bite-sized urban fantasy fun. I want more of them. I want Eric to write more. Number 25 was Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey. I read this book with Ira for our buddy read that we did earlier this month, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I don't think it was anything amazing, but it was a really interesting book. It blended elements of science fiction and fantasy together perfectly. You have these genetically engineered dragons who breathe fire. They have telepathy to communicate with humans. And they also have like a warp drive, essentially. They can bend time and space around them to teleport. I thought that was really, really cool. So I'll have to see what the rest of the series holds. I know it's a big, long series that Anne McCaffrey and her son wrote together. And I'll have to see what the other books have in store before I make any kind of real final analysis of Dragonflight, because I might like it even more after I've read other books in the series. And then number 24 was Eyes in All Shadows by Rob Rhymes. This was a collection of short stories set in his Barbarians of the Storm universe. They're ridiculous, they're absurd, but they are a lot of fun. And so I don't think Rob is going to win any awards for prose or anything like that. He writes all these books like they're the scripts for comic books, because the first book, Dan the Destructor, was supposed to be a comic book. But they are a lot of fun. They're zany and wacky and humorous and over-the-top violent. You know I like some over-the-top violence. And speaking of violence, number 23 was The Iron Man by Robert E. Howard. This was a great little collection of his boxing stories. I really enjoyed it. Is it some of his best work? No, but it's a lot of fun. I'd recommend it to any Robert E. Howard fan and any boxing fan. It was a fun little bit of boxing fiction. Number 22 was NonStop by Brian Aldiss. I've always wanted to read Brian Aldiss. I've heard good things about him, and I tried him this year. NonStop was a pretty cool science fiction story. Really, the only thing that brought it down was the main characters. Most of the cast of this story are very unlikable, but the plot itself is great. There's a great mystery that the characters have to solve, and it was really cool seeing them slowly uncover details about what's going on. And number 21 was Nine Princes in Amber by Roger Zelazny. I enjoyed this book quite a bit. I think that Roger Zelazny's weird, out there writing style kept it from being, in the top percentile of my reads for this year. But I still enjoyed it immensely, and I will be getting on to the rest of the series soon. And then number 20 was The Texas-Israeli War, 1999, by Jake Saunders and Howard Waltrip. This was just a solid action novel, a war novel. Has a little bit of some science fiction elements, just a tiny bit. But really, it's just a sort of alternate history war story, and I'm glad that Jake picked it for Eves because we had a lot of fun reading it. All right, we're getting into the real good stuff now. Number 19 was The Vanishing Tower by Michael Moorcock. This is book 4 of the Elric saga, book 5 if you count the Fortress of the Pearl, which is a sort of side novel. And yeah, what can I say? It's Elric. Elric is always awesome. This might be the lesser of the Elric novels that I've read so far, but even then, it's some great stuff. A lot of fun. Good old-fashioned sword and sorcery. And speaking of sword and sorcery, number 18 was Solomon Kane by Robert E. Howard. The Centaur Press edition of Solomon Kane collects a bunch of those stories. Some of them were duds, but the ones that were good were really, really good. I very much enjoyed that Solomon Kane collection. And number 17 was A Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. I had kind of picked around the Edgar Rice Burroughs bibliography for a while. I never committed to anything until this year, and I read Princess of Mars, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that novel quite a bit. It's tropey, it's kind of cliche, but this is the book that started a lot of those tropes. So I couldn't be too hard on it. And yeah, it was just a good bit of action-adventure in outer space. Then number 16 was Fangs of the Moon Opal by Eric Wagg. This was the second of his Sword and 70s novelettes. It takes everything that worked about the first one, throws in some werewolves and some gang violence. It was quite a bit of fun. Number 15, this is The Black Crown by John A. Douglas. I had not very high expectations going into this novel, and it blew me away how much I enjoyed it. This is the best epic fantasy novel that I have read in a long time, and it was his first book. That's amazing. A first book this good is unprecedented. My first book wasn't this good. My second book wasn't this good. So big props to John for that. I can't wait for the next book in the series. Number 14 was The Pale Horseman by Bernard Cornwell. This is the second of his Last Kingdom series, also known as the Saxon Tales, the Saxon Saga. It has a bunch of different names. But yeah, good bit of action-adventure during the Viking invasions of England. It's got Vikings, it's got warfare. What else can you ask for? Number 13 was Atomic Beasts and Where to Kill Them. This is the second main novel in Barbarians of the Storm series by Rob Rhimes. Again, took everything from the first book and just cranked it up just a little bit more. It's even more ridiculous, even more absurd, but it's hilarious, and I very much recommend that series. Number 12 was another indie. This is Weird of the Skull Totem by Eric Wagg. This is Eric's best book so far, in my opinion. It's creepy. It's cool. There's a lot of great sword and sorcery action. Really the only thing that kept it out of the top 10 for me was the fact that our main character, Skarda, is kind of different in this book. He's the captain of a pirate crew, so he's not really allowed to be his usual happy-go-lucky, sarcastic self. He has to be a little more serious, and I feel like that brought the tone down a little bit more compared to the first book. But I can forgive it. I'm definitely excited to see where the next one goes. And then number 11, I am mad that I could not keep this in the top 10, but every other book that I read this year was just that much better. So I wish I could put it in there. But this was Derel of Joy by C.L. Moore. I loved this book. I technically read it twice this year. I read it once at the beginning of the year, and then again when we read it for Eves. And it's just so much fun. C.L. Moore is a fantastic writer. She's slowly becoming one of my favorite writers from the pulp era. She has a really unique writing style, and she takes the view, of a woman and applies it to sword and sorcery. And it's really interesting. Her character Derel is kind of a girl boss, but there's a reason for her to be that way. She backs up her words with her actions. She's a very tough character. She has a lot of strength of will, and she's not like this pompous, egotistical character. She never uses her power for her own gains. The most petty thing she does in this book is she tries to get revenge on a guy, and that's about it. Usually she's fighting for her people, fighting for the people she cares about, and I can appreciate that. And the stories are just gnarly and awesome. Great, creepy sword and sorcery. But guys, that is it. That is books 56 to 11 of the books that I read in 2024. Stay tuned for the next video where I will talk about the top 10. But until then, of course, let me know in the comments, what did you think? Have you read any of these books? Please go easy on me for for First Law. I'm sorry. I don't get it. I don't get what you guys see in it. But until next time, as always, farewell and keep reading.